think we understand this story, we have been told that it is a story of charisma. It tells the story of a strong man who led and acted in a national drama through sheer force of will and eloquence. The truth, however, is much more disturbing. It is a story of performance. Its protagonist was not a born strong man, but an actor. His power did not come from who he was, but from his extreme malleability. History has preserved a series of remarkable photographs. In 1925, he rehearsed and choreographed the gestures that would later hypnotize an entire nation in front of his own recordings and cameras. He was not a void, he was an actor. He thus became the ultimate screen for a defeated and humiliated culture that aspired to redemption. He became what Max Weber defined as a charismatic leader whose authority did not come from what he was, but from what a nation eager for salvation believed him to be. It was a social relationship, a collusion between actor and audience. As Gustave Le Bon revealed, crowds possess a psychology of suggestibility and desire to be governed, and he learned to play the role of the Messiah they dreamed of. To understand how this Messiah was invented, we must first analyze this actor. The defining characteristic of this actor was the meticulously crafted role he had assigned himself. He was not anti-charismatic. He was a master of the stage who had turned his weakness into a political trademark. The historical archives are remarkably consistent on this point. We can start with his Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. In his diary from 1929, the man who would soon invent the myth of the Fettrer privately assessed the actor. Hitler is too weak. This is not a complaint about the raw material. It is Goebbels, the director, taking notes on Hitler's initial acting style and lamenting his lack of dominant presence. This weakness was carefully observed by Hitler's enemies, who conducted more in-depth investigations. A psychological analysis report written in 1943 by the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, provided additional information. Although the report touched on the subject of feminization, it focused primarily on a profound borderline personality and a messiah complex. It stated that he firmly believed in his own greatness, could never be wrong, and compared himself to Jesus Christ, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. He needed to play the role of God to mask his deep insecurities. He was an individual who was extremely sensitive to the value of image. His panic in the face of physical questions is a meticulously crafted political performance. Historical records indicate that in his youth, he ran away in embarrassment after being approached by a peasant woman. When his comrades tried to take him to a brothel, he resisted vehemently, feeling ashamed and degraded. When faced with invitations from influential homosexual men, such as those in Ernst Reichem circle, he did not display worldly indifference, but rather a kind of puritanical fury. At private gatherings, he would not tolerate vulgar jokes and would mercilessly expel anyone who used foul language. This puritanical fury was a public moral performance intended to attract conservative voters, and was a response to the decadent culture of the declining Weimar Republic. This control over his image ultimately defined his longest relationship. The nicknames he gave Eva Braun were not those of a lover, but terms from the Austrian dialect that were completely asexual and even condescending: chaparral, hascherl, and patcherl. These terms meant little idiot or little scatterbrain. However, this was not maternal affection, but rather the ultimate form of control achieved by treating his mistress like a child. These condescending and controlling nicknames allowed him to display his superiority even in his most intimate relationships. He was not passively contemplated. He was a precise mirror, actively providing each gaze with the reflection it desired. Hitler built his reputation in Germany through violence and his talents as an orator, thereby winning over the masses. However, among the upper classes, it was thanks to his extensive musical knowledge that he was able to integrate into high society circles. During a conversation with the director of the Weimar National Theater, Hitler provided a detailed analysis of Wagner's opera Die Walk, Akuma, comparing the Weimar production to the famous historical performance he had attended in Vienna. Prominent figures such as the famous piano manufacturer Edwin Bechstein and illustrious publishers welcomed Hitler into their circles, playing a decisive role in his rise to high society. This prototype of the Messiah was built in salons and rural estates. The first piece of the puzzle was image. He burst onto the high society scene as a clumsy, failed artist. Helene Bechstein, wife of the famous piano manufacturer, discovered him. She almost invented him. She taught him table manners, bought him his first decent coat and his first Mercedes-Benz. This was not just financial support, but a form of adoption. After the failed coup in 1923, while he was imprisoned in Landsberg, she even declared herself his adoptive mother to the authorities in order to circumvent visiting restrictions. Hitler would sit at Bechstein's feet, resting his head against her chest, while she gently stroked his hair, murmuring, "Mein Wolfchen, my little wolf." But this was not selfless maternal devotion, but rather a social investment. She needed a disciple, and he perfectly embodied that docile, rough gem waiting to be shaped. She polished him to turn him into a product for public consumption. Empress Hermine, wife of Emperor Wilhelm II, inspected this product at the 1929 Nuremberg rally. What she saw was not a vulgar political demagogue, but a prophet. She was completely captivated by him, writing in her letters that he possessed a pair of exquisite eyes. She was convinced that he was sent by God. Her gaze was purely political. She didn't care whether he was educated or not. She only cared whether he was that divinely chosen instrument to overthrow the Republic and help her restore the German Empire. Thus, he played the role of the divine messenger she so desired. Finally, when image and divinity converged, he encountered the most deadly gaze ideology. Winifred Wagner, daughter-in-law of composer Richard Wagner, was instantly captivated from their first meeting in 1923. That year, Hitler knocked on the Wagner family's door, seeking not only social status, but also an ideological home. Winifred needed neither a disciple nor a prophet, but a hero who embodied Richard Wagner's anti-Semitism and Germanic mythology. Hitler played this role to perfection. During his imprisonment in Landsberg, Winifred provided him with food and writing paper. It is very likely that Mein Kampf was written on these very sheets. He became a frequent visitor to her home, forming close ties with her children, who affectionately called him Uncle Wolf. This regard lasted so long that decades after the war, when everything had long since been reduced to ashes and the flames of Nuremberg had died down, Winifred remained unperturbed in an interview in 1975. "If he walked through that door today, I would still be as happy, as delighted to see him as I always have been. If he walked through that door today, I would be just as happy and delighted to see him here, as I always have been." Her gaze was ideological. She needed a hero who could embody Richard Wagner's anti-Semitism and Germanic mythology. Hitler playing the piano, Suez, was a performance staged for her, proving that he was Wagner's artistic heir. The gaze of high society helped shape his image and destiny. However, it was the gaze of philosophy that legitimized him and truly propelled this invention. The place, the home of existentialist philosopher Karl Jaspers in Heidelberg. The atmosphere was somber. Jaspers feared the rise of Nazism. His wife, Gertrude, was Jewish, his old friend and colleague Martin Heidegger. Then Germany's most eminent philosopher arrived for dinner. Heidegger had just taken over as rector of the University of Freiburg and had joined the Nazi Party, according to the recollections of Jaspers and his wife. Heidegger wore the Nazi Party badge prominently on his lapel when he entered their home. During dinner, Jaspers confronted Heidegger. This exchange was recorded by Jaspers in his philosophical autobiography. How could someone as uneducated as Hitler lead Germany? Heidegger's response was neither political nor logical. Education is of no importance. Look instead at these magnificent hands. This is philosophy, not aesthetics. Heidegger despised the abstract rationality represented by Jasper Suh. He was captivated by the work, action, and authentic decision symbolized by the hands. He did not see Hitler, but the political embodiment of his own philosophy. He confused a meticulously rehearsed theatrical pose with the realization of being. This precisely defines the fundamental logic of fascism, as articulated by another German Jewish philosopher, Walter Benjamin, as the aestheticization of politics. Benjamin warned that when politics becomes art, when leaders are contemplated as works of art, and when the success of a movement is judged not by reason, but by aesthetic experience, critical thinking dies. The role of the actor was perfectly fulfilled. The performance of high society gave him an image. The gaze of the aristocrat gave him a divine mandate. The philosophical gaze gives him legitimacy, transforming a political atrocity into the realization of being. The actor has finished his audition. The script has already been written for now, however. This Messiah is only a prototype, a concept conceived in salons and universities. The real question is, how was this prototype mass-produced? How did this invention become a virus? And how did this performance of purity, as analyzed by Susan Sontag, turn into a collective eroticism for uniforms, power, and destruction itself?